And now our last speaker, last but not least, is Professor Demetra Sfendoni-Mentzou from the University of Thessaloniki, who is also president of the Interdisciplinary Centre for Aristotle Studies, a center which has contributed a lot to the study of Aristotle's legacy in contemporary times. Demetra, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stelios. Hello, Brian. Dear colleagues, this is the last presentation of the session, so please be patient. I will also talk about Aristotle, whom, in a way, I consider as my compatriot, since he was born in Stageirite, a place very near Thessaloniki, my birthplace, and he taught Alexander the Great in Mysa, another place also very near to Thessaloniki. So it is my hope that in the next year's symposium on Aristotle and Confucius, we will be able to carry on the works of the symposium in Thessaloniki and in these two emblematic places. I'm looking at Jeff. It is my own wish, but also it is a proposal on behalf of the Interdisciplinary Centre for Aristotle Studies of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Certainly, it would be hopeless to try to present all aspects of Aristotle's work in this session, or even to discuss in depth a tiny piece of his thoughts and his work. So I will try to provide an answer to the following questions. What makes Aristotle's work so great? Why did Aristotle have a unique and uninterrupted effect on the human intellect over a period of 2,400 years and continues to be alive today? And second question, why do we read Aristotle today? What do we have to learn from his wisdom? To answer the first question, let me first say that Aristotle has produced a multifarious work which covers all basic areas of philosophy, such as logic, metaphysics, moral and political philosophy, poetics, rhetoric, but also extends in an impressive number of scientific disciplines, such as physics, biology, marine biology, zoology, embryology, teratology, developmental biology, botany, taxonomy, psychology, medicine, agriculture, mathematics, chemistry, meteorology, astronomy, geology, medicine, and I have not mentioned all of them. This is why I like to say that Aristotle is the omniscientist philosopher, in Greek, panepistemon philosophos, and this is where the name of university panepistemio comes. This does not mean that Aristotle studied all these fields of science and philosophy, but he put the foundations of these separate disciplines. This was indeed the work of an exceptionally gifted intellect. So Plato admired Aristotle so much that he used to call him o nous, the mind. And we know that Dante has called Aristotle the teacher of the wise, or of those who know. Now, let me say a few things about Aristotle's work connected with the sciences. Certainly, one cannot but begin by saying that Aristotle delineated the object, the territories of the science, and one cannot but speak with admiration about the incredible wealth of his observations in all areas of philosophy of nature, about the number kind of researches he conducted during his stay in Assos, in Lesbos, and in Macedonia, about the number of dissections he made. This is something very little known. All this proves that Aristotle, also deserves the name of the research scientist. However, what makes Aristotle's contribution to science even more valuable and timeless is the fact that he laid the foundations of the very concept of episteme, science. That is, he contributed substantially to the birth, the genesis of science as a special way of knowing, gnoskin in ancient Greek. We used to think that the rules, the standards, and the goals of scientific enterprise that we all acknowledge and accept were always there. But this is not the case. We must understand that they were indeed gigantic steps in the origins of the intellectual history of mankind. Such, I believe, are the following Aristotle's intellectual achievements. In prior analytics, Aristotle gave us the laws of human mind and of syllogism, the logic and the method of science. In posterior analytics and also in physics, he made clear that knowing, epistasthe, is understanding. This means scientific knowledge, episteme, is not restricted to the description of things, gvid, but needs to be knowledge of causes, propter gvid, and certainly scientific knowledge and truth should be based on justification and proof. Moreover, Aristotle organized the complex material of the totality of the physical world in his 10 categories so as to be able to organize the variety and complexity. He extended these tools by introducing for the first time such concepts as substance, ousia, potentiality and actuality, causality, matter and form, nature, space, time, infinity, motion, continuity, concepts that are still an essential part of the philosophical and scientific discourse. Furthermore, he introduced as an interdisciplinary approach to knowledge. He taught us that scientific knowledge cannot be cut in pieces, that the real scientist must have an overall understanding of the totality of knowledge, and that the whole is something more than the sum of the parts. I would thus say that Aristotle's insights on all these matters have a lot to teach us today in the field of scientific research, and at the same time they can provide powerful arguments for today's scientific realism in its criticism of all trends of positivism. And now, let me say a few words about Aristotle's moral and political philosophy, a crucial issue in our times. Aristotle has taught us that ethics and politics cannot be separated. They are closely related. At the center of this investigation is always o anthropos, the human being, who is defined by Aristotle as an animal by nature, natural and political, physizoon, logikon, politikon. This means that anthropos, by nature, is governed by logic and acquires its meaning only within the community. The free human being seeks the good to agathon. This consists in his doing the social and political duty. And this can be done by the exercise of practical wisdom, phronesis, and that one can be able to distinguish good from evil. Conceptions such as virtue, arete, happiness, eudaimonia, wisdom, phronesis, friendship, philia, are very important for Aristotle's moral and political model. Central idea in that is that of mesotis, the mean. He claims that virtue, excellence, arete should dominate our impulses and instincts so that we can be able to achieve the metron, measure, the mesotis, between the two ends, excess and deficiency, hyperbole και έλλειψη. To achieve the good, and finally, eudaimonia, passions must be in reasonable control and in agreement with reason, logos. So, following Aristotle, we need to think and provide an answer to the following question. What is the best life, o Aristos Vios? The answer we will provide will depend on the definition we will choose for ourselves as human beings. We have to think, what is my essential property that belongs to my nature? Shall I characterize myself as Homo economicus, Homo technicus, Homo mortialis, Homo bellicosus? It's very good for, for these days. Or shall I agree with Aristotle that anthropos is by nature a logical and political animal, zoon logikon politikon? For Aristotle, reason is extremely important. It can lead us to happy life, evdemon vios, but how can this be accomplished? It can only be accomplished if I connect my political life with my moral life and both with my theoretical life. How can this be done? Aristotle tells us this can only be done by pedia. I don't use the word education. I prefer to use the word pedia because they're very different, and in the discussion I can explain this. This is something I say that all citizens, and particularly and especially all politicians, should take seriously the issue of pedia in order to accomplish all the things that I have referred to. I now wish to conclude by saying, am I okay? That Aristotle has left us an intellectual heritage and a legacy which is still extremely valid. His insights in all areas of his work make him a completely contemporary thinker with whom we can open a dialogue. Thus, my suggestion, which also introduces a neo-Aristotelianism, is that we must attempt a rereading of Aristotle's work in the light both of recent discoveries in all fields of science and of crucial challenges in our own troubled times, many of which are already included in the agenda of this very interesting workshop. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, so I think we've got some time for questions. Why don't you raise your hands, and I'll try to get everybody's names. When I call on you, please stand up to let us know who you are, and if there's a particular person you'd like to address your question to, let me know. I think Jeffrey Sachs was first. Why don't you go ahead? Oh, sorry, where's our microphone?
I want to thank everybody for wonderful presentations, and also 10 minutes for Aristotle, 10 minutes for Moism, 10 minutes for Sophism. This is quite a challenge. 10 minutes for the creation. And everybody gave a very, very rich précis. We should collect all of these statements or written statements so that they can be shared among the participants and people can read them and study them. So I would just ask our technical team to make sure that everything, all the presentations, all the texts are available to us. This would be very helpful. For me, a crucial point, if I may take a few minutes, of what I find extremely important about all of this is that not only are these philosophical pathways so rich and crucial, but to my mind, they are very different from the dominant pathway that we live in right now, or that has dominated global discourse, I would say, for the last 2 centuries at least. That to me is very significant and one of the main reasons why we are here. There's another, I believe, extremely important school of thought, which is quite different from what we've heard. Most of what we've heard is a kind of virtue ethics. The idea that at some level, the individual character should be cultivated to live fruitfully in society. I think that that is a fair representation of all of the philosophies that we've heard. Of course, how to make that cultivation differs, whether it's by ritual or by logos or by the sophists' approach of comparative understanding to find a common ground. But the idea for all is that we should develop ourselves better to live a better life. There is, I believe, a different variant, which is really mostly identifiable as a British philosophy dating back probably to nominalism in the 13th century, but really finding its strong voice beginning with Bacon, Francis Bacon, John Locke, Hume, Smith, the British empiricist tradition. The underpinnings of that are really very different, in my understanding, from the virtue ethics. And since I'm trained in that tradition as an economist, I required 30 or 40 years to understand that there was another tradition, because in economics we're also told a real fib, which started with Karl Marx, because he used the term classical economists to refer to economists of the late 18th century. This is a strange idea, because in economics, as it's taught in the modern world, history begins around 1750. I don't mean 1750 BC, I mean 1750 AD. And the classics are Adam Smith and David Ricardo. This is very strange to use the term classics, and it cuts off the whole classical heritage. Now, why is this important? Because by virtue of history in its various forms, the British philosophy became the dominant mode of discourse for world economy and politics for 200 years. Because the British Empire and then the American Empire were the two hegemons of the last 200 years. And hegemonic not only in power and wealth, but hegemonic in intellectual, linguistic, and philosophical dominance. What is the difference of this British philosophy, which became an American philosophy of libertarianism afterwards? I forgot to mention the lead most important of these after Bacon was not Locke, but was Hobbes. The idea of the nominalist and then Hobbesian and then Lockean and Smithian view is that individuals are unitary, solitary, and basically fully formed, not subject to cultivation, not divided in their psyches, as Aristotle said, between more instinctive and more rational impulses, but rather unitary. And in economics, that's a utility function. There is a sole, clear, permanent, fixed, individual, given set of preferences. We are told the first day in economics, don't question the preferences. Whereas the first day in Athens, you were told, question your preferences, know yourself, examine your motivations, understand your reasons. In economics, it is gustibus non est disputatum. Do not debate tastes. They are given, they are your utility function. And they are unchangeable. Hobbes was probably the most clear of all of these. Not only are the tastes given, they are insatiable. Not only are they insatiable, if left to the individuals, they will kill each other to satisfy their tastes. And Hobbes goes on at great length that life is solitary, short, what is the...
solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, which an Irish philosopher told me was rewritten as solitary, poor, nasty, British, and short. But the idea is that there's a fight. And so in the West, in the British tradition, you have given tastes. You're out to maximize them. And the essence is that social institutions should keep you from killing each other. And three kinds of social institutions were devised. The Leviathan of Hobbes, that is what Weber called the monopoly of legitimate power. People can't kill each other, only the state can do that, and the state keeps people from killing each other. Then Locke, in the second treatise on government, talked about government by consent. This obviously has some ancient roots and some modern roots and meant a lot of different things, depending on whose consent was being asked, generally white men, and white men with wealth. And the third was Smith, which was that the market would be the mediator. And the market would allow individual insatiable tastes to create by an invisible hand, meant in a providential sense, social well-being. But what's different from virtue ethics is there is no sense whatsoever of self-control, of cultivation, of learning sociability, of creating through ritual or mentorship or paideia or anything else a better person. There is only the design of social institutions to take into account the insatiable urges of individuals. There's one, I think, extremely positive side of this, and then countless negative sides. But the positive side was by putting the will at the top and linking it to Bacon's actual incredibly fertile insight that science would develop a way of living that would improve the human condition, which was an unimaginable insight in 1600, but was Bacon's insight. The will was empowered to be the entrepreneur in a way, was the one that was empowered to create new things, but also to seize lands, to take what you can. And this created, on the positive side, the wealth of nations, because that was a different idea rather than a static society. It was a society of human-made change with the idea of progress that progressively developed. But it was a society of will, without phronesis, without temperance, without any idea of virtue, only the constraint, if it exists, of law. This became, in my opinion, the dominant way of thinking. Maybe I'm a little exaggerating because it's the way I was trained completely, literally, mathematically, precisely, in many, many specific ways. I'm trained in late 17th century British psychology. That is economics, modern economics. But, and because of the steam engine, industrialization, the atomic bomb and all the rest, the United States and Britain dominated the discourse for 200 years. And just to conclude, I think we are profoundly in need of recovering the first 2,000 years of our understanding of this, not just the last 200 years. And this is obvious perhaps here or in other places, but not in the Anglo-Saxon world. We're at the end, I think, of the Anglo-Saxon cycle globally, which is fine, in my view, as long as we don't blow up in the process of transition. But the 200 years of British and American dominance in the world are basically over. We are in need of, therefore, a much richer psychology, virtue ethics, understanding about how to find social peace, and all the things we talked about. That, to me, is what is at stake in the discussion. Because if it were merely the fact that these wonderful ideas continue to be propounded, discussed, and all the rest, it would be a little bit less drama in the world. But we don't hear a discourse about the common good, finding common ground, cultivating the virtues of temperance or practical wisdom and so forth. And that, I think, is why we have such a high stakes in this discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, those are very insightful comments. I'll just abuse my privilege as co-chair to make a brief comment. I think, in my opinion, one thing I sometimes tell my students about Thomas Hobbes is that he's the smartest, stupid person you'll ever read. Because Hobbes has this utterly juvenile conception of human nature, but he develops a political philosophy out of it with ruthless consistency, and it's become immensely influential in Western thought. And to give you a sense of two very different approaches to human nature and also to politics, I'd recommend, if you haven't already done so, read Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan and read the Mengzi, which is an eponymous Confucian work, M-E-N-G-Z-I. I'm biased because I translated it, but it is a deeply influential Confucian work, in some ways more influential than even the Analects, the sayings of Confucius himself. And you'll get two very different conceptions of human nature, and with them two very different conceptions of politics and different recommendations for how we should proceed from here. But let me ask the speakers, would you like to say something?
I would like to add a comment on what Jeff so very nicely has analyzed about what happened all these centuries with the domination of the English Empire and the Americans and all this. I think that all this, which is very true, and it's a very thorough analysis of all these events that happened, and we are in this stage now about economics and ethics and all this. I think it can be explained or goes in hand with the rejection of Aristotle in the field of science, with the Renaissance, with the protagonists of the new science, Copernicus, Galileus, and then Newton. Aristotle was completely rejected as a failure because we had experiment, we had dominating experiment that they thought you cannot find in Aristotle, but you can find. And also there was a mathematization of nature, and the important thing was the quantity, describe things in mathematics, in the language of mathematics, forget about quality, whereas in Aristotle, the important thing is quality and not quantity. So Aristotle was thought that finished. It's no good at all for at least 3 centuries. And with the dominance of Newtonian mechanics for 3 centuries, there was no place in science for Aristotle. This influenced also the attitude in ethics, in economics. They didn't read Aristotle. They thought he has nothing to say. So they developed another approach to all these problems. So their ethics became very different. They didn't take into consideration those things that today we say are very important and we should take as to guide our lives. So they go together. And I'm very happy to say that after the second half of the 20th century, till then we had the dominance of all trends of positivism. We had the dominance of analytic philosophy. And analytic philosophy is very empty considering all these things we are talking about. It's a very happy incident that things have changed after the second part of the 20th century. And so Aristotle has started to come back in science also with very fruitful ideas in the field of science, not only in ethics. I like to emphasize this. And so we have a revival of an interest in Aristotle. That's why I say we must reread Aristotle, because they read very wrongly Aristotle for many centuries. We have to take and read Aristotle again in the light of new discoveries we have in science also. In biology, things have been very different now. In quantum mechanics, physics of elementary particles, then we'll see that the dynamic model of Aristotle, which you cannot find in Newtonian physics, which is a static model. And static, I would say, is in the case of ethics and moral life. They go in hand together. So it is very good that we start rediscovering, rereading Aristotle. And there is so much that we have to learn today. And all of us, we must make an effort to develop this and make people know what we are discovering by rereading Aristotle.
Thank you very much. I very rudely jumped over Bishop Marcello, who had his hand up. So please let me give the mic over to him. So